Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. Well, today we're going to talk about a topic that's been around for 30 years or so, and that is DCC Friendly. And in this case, I'm going to focus on DCC Friendly turnouts. And the reason that we're going to be looking at this is a viewer wrote me a comment pointing out that I never really have talked about exactly what I mean by DCC Friendly turnouts. And sure enough, I went back and looked at some of the old videos I did, and I talked around the issue, but I never really explained what is a DCC friendly turnout. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, before we get started on the subject of DCC-friendly turnouts, I do want to make you aware of a couple of things. First off, there is still a major problem and a major shortage of electrical components for building the equipment that we want to buy and use on our model railroads. And manufacturers are trying to deal with this, but it's a real issue, particularly when it comes to microprocessors. They are in very short supply, and it's hard for small companies to be able to bid against some of the large companies in order to get stock of these microprocessors. And it is starting to impact on the actual companies themselves. I just learned, for example, that DigiKey's, the company that makes the DigiKey's or DigiKeys DR5000 command station and a lot of other things, is going out of business. They've declared bankruptcy. We don't know whether or not that means they're going to completely shut down or suspend operations or what. At this point, I suspect that if they've got a problem building components, they're probably going to have a hard time trying to stay in business through a bankruptcy operation. So I don't expect them to be around. And there are still other companies that are having occasional problems with getting supplies of their products out. I know that NCE just managed to get out a big batch of power cabs. I've seen a number of emails come in from various companies advertising that they now have power cabs in stock. So if you've been waiting for one of those, you might want to check in right now and get your order in while there might be some in stock at these dealers. Other things like the DCC Concepts IP digital switch machines are also very scarce. They right now are only getting about 1,000 of those per month out of China. And unfortunately, that is not enough to supply all of their demand. Now, they're expecting very soon for that number to double. So they should be seeing 2,000 a month. Hopefully, that will help fill out a lot of the back orders and demand for these. The main thing to remember in all of this is if you're looking for something like an IP digital switch machine, a power cab, or any of these other things, and they are out of stock, put in a back order for them. That way, as soon as the company makes a batch of them and ships them out to their dealers, you'll get your order filled. If you're going to sit around and wait looking for something to come back into stock, you might not see it for a very long time because these products are being made in batches. When the batches are shipped, the back orders are filled, and that might just totally wipe out the entire shipment. So get your orders in, sit back and wait for your order to finally be filled. That might be the best way for you to actually get what you need, particularly if it involves a microprocessor. Okay, let's go ahead and move on and talk about DCC-friendly turnouts. Before we dive into DCC-friendly turnouts per se, I want to give you a little bit of the history on this. And the concepts of DCC Friendly goes back to around 1994, 1995, when DCC was brand new, and we were first seeing some of the problems associated with short circuits on layouts. And at that time, Alan Gartner, who now writes the DCC column for Model Railroader magazine, came up with this idea of, or this concept of DCC Friendly. And he was looking at it at the time mainly with respect to turnouts and the effects that shorts at turnouts have on DCC. And let me point out that this comes down to a major difference between DC and DCC and how we operate. And with DC, on a layout, if you're going to operate, say, 4 trains at a time, you're going to have 4 separate power packs, one for each train that you want to operate, and a way of switching power to the various blocks. Now, unfortunately, if you have a short circuit in that block associated with that train that you're running, it's going to shut down that power pack, and that power pack only. The other 3 power packs are going to keep running, and the trains that they are powering are going to keep operating. So it doesn't impact the rest of them. Now, back then, that wasn't true with DCC. When you had a short circuit, it would shut down the command station booster, and every train on the layout would come to a crashing halt because the command station was shut down. And that was one of the unfortunate consequences associated with DCC and short circuits at the time. So what we were really looking at then is anything on a model railroad that can result in a short circuit that will shut down your command station. Now these days it isn't as bad as that because we can use circuit breakers, we can use multiple boosters, and we can try to isolate these shorts only to affected blocks. So we can only shut down a few trains at a time. However, people who are not using circuit breakers and people who have small to mid-sized layouts that operate with one command station booster combination, it can still be a problem. And I have a friend whose model railroad mid-sized layout is that type of situation where somebody goes through a turnout incorrectly and boom, everybody stops running and we have to sit and wait for that individual to figure out how they shorted out the whole layout. So that's what it comes down to. It's a matter of a difference between DC and DCC operations, and that's why short circuits, particularly at turnouts, are so important when it comes to DCC and less of a problem when it came to DC operations. But at any rate, the great thing is a DCC-friendly turnout is DC-friendly as well. So the major change has been that the companies making all of these turnouts have now made an effort to try to eliminate problems and potential shorts at turnouts. So let's go ahead and take a look at turnouts and see what it is about them that can make them DCC unfriendly. I've zoomed in here so that I can show you 3 different types of turnouts. Now this first one here, this great big one, is an old Shinohara turnout. And it is the epitome, it's the poster boy for DCC unfriendly because it has everything that you don't want to have with respect to DCC. Now the first thing we want to focus in on here is right here, the points, and where the points contact the stock rails because that's where the action is. So I'm going to zoom in so we can see that a little bit better here. There we go. And if we look at this, the important thing about these is right here. If you see right here, there are these metal strips that connect the 2 point rails together. And that is simply so that they do throw at the same time. If I can do this, you can see that they're both throwing. Now, when they do throw, they make contact either with this stock rail or this one. And that provides the electrical connection. With whatever power and whatever polarity or phase this rail is, it's going to make this one powered and this one powered. And they're going to be the same polarity or phase, simply because this is a metal connection here between the 2, and it conveys power to both of these at the same time. Now, also, this continuity continues up to the closure rail here because they are connected at this point. There is an internal jumper underneath of these 2 rails that makes the electrical connection. So if these are positive here, if this rail is positive, this will be positive, this will be positive, that will be negative. Same thing up here, positive, 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 negative. And straight on through, it continues up here to the frog. And you can see it's a continuous piece of rail making this connection. And it's electrically the same. So this will be positive, positive, positive. The frog will be positive. And then it continues again to the frog rails. And once again, because everything is all connected, you will have positive, 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 and negative at this point. Now that's where a problem starts to come in, because these frog rails butt up against two adjacent rails, and those two adjacent rails are different polarity. So depending on which way this is thrown, if a locomotive creeps across the gap here, it can create a short circuit. And that is one of the problems with these turnouts, is because both of these rails are the same polarity. One of them will be the same polarity as the adjacent rail, the other one will be the opposite. So any locomotive creeping across this joint is going to cause a short circuit. Now, of course, it does mean, though, that your frog is powered. That's one of the good things about these. The bad thing is it can cause a lot of problems with respect to DCC and shorts. Now, the issue up here, if we have a locomotive or a car with metal wheels and it comes up in here, and for some reason it derails at the points, and these metal wheels make a connection between these two rails of opposite polarity. Because remember, I said this is positive, 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 and negative. So if this makes a connection here across this gap at the rails, that's going to short it out. It's not as big an issue for DC as it is for DCC, as I explained up front. But that is one of the main problems with these old turnouts, is that you have rails of opposite polarity right here at the points, and that can cause a short if you have a derailment anywhere in here, and those metal wheels fall in the gap or cross that gap and make that connection. So that's the first problem, and that's the first thing that needs to be fixed, and that is to isolate these two rails here so that they are of opposite polarity instead of the same. They are the same polarity as the adjacent stock rails. That way you can't have a short if you get a derailment through here. And then we want to isolate these guys too. We want to isolate our frog and power it independently. And we want to isolate the frog rails so that they are either unpowered or the same power or polarity as the stock rails. Okay, so let's take a look at how you go about doing that. Hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Now, this is another Shinohara turnout, just like the one I showed you, except for the fact that I've made the modifications that I showed in a previous video on how to convert your turnouts, old turnouts, to DCC friendly turnouts. And the first thing here is, if you look, I have replaced that metal bar or strip that connects the two rails, the 2-point rails, with a PC board tie that is copper clad. And I've soldered those two rails ends to the top of that copper clad PCB tie, and I've scraped off all of the copper in between. So these are electrically isolated and independent. They will not be the same polarity. So if you get a metal wheel dropping down in here, it's not going to create a short circuit. Now, the rest of this. In order to further isolate the two rails, I have cut a gap right here using a Dremel tool, and I have added jumpers here between the stock rail and the closure rail, here and here. I've also taken a wire and ran it to the point rail and powered it using that jumper wire. So everything in this is now independently powered and will be the same polarity as the adjacent stock rail. So if this is positive, that'll be positive. If this is negative, this will be negative. Same here, positive, positive, negative, negative. You can't get a short circuit if you derail at this point. Now, as I said, I isolated the frog from the closure rail right here by using my Dremel tool to cut a gap. I then cut another gap right here on the other side of the frog. So that frog is totally isolated now from the rest of the rails here on the turnout. Then all I do is attach a feeder, solder a feeder to the side of the frog, and that will allow me to selectively power this frog using the contacts on a Walthers switch machine, an IP digital switch machine, or a tortoise switch machine, and any other that has the ability to do that. It also means that these two frog rails are now unpowered. And then I can solder these two rails, these two frog rails, to the adjoining running rails, and that will power them, and they will be the correct polarity all the time. It also means that a locomotive that creeps up in here can actually come up here almost to the frog before it crosses a gap and creates a short circuit. So that further lessens the likelihood that an engineer is going to let his train creep too close to the frog. Because, it's easy to do it here. It's a lot harder to just ignore the fact that you're almost on the frog and creating a short circuit. So it does tend to prevent that type of problem. And you can see underneath here, I have not made any other connections. Now, if we look back, this is the Walthers curved turnout that I've shown you previously in a previous video. And as I showed you then, what Walthers has done, and most manufacturers, they have taken and they have isolated the 2 point rails here using this plastic throw bar so that they're electrically insulated. They've now got this as a continuous piece of rail going up almost to the frog. And then when they get up to the frog, there is a plastic insulator between these rails and the frog itself. So that frog is isolated from them. And again, down here, they have added a jumper between the stock rail and the closure rail, point rail, and a jumper here between this one and this one. So those are independently powered. They are always the same power as the adjacent stock rail. Now if we look here, we've got our frog sitting here. We've got a plastic gap here and a plastic gap here. So this is unpowered, and you can power it. They provided this little solder tab right here where you can connect a feeder wire and power it independently. Also, the frog rails at this point are powered by jumpers that connect them to the adjacent stock rails. So they will always be the same polarity as the stock rails that they are paired with, and they will be the correct polarity for the adjacent running rails. So you won't get those shorts there. So that cleans up the problem. So that's why these are such a great improvement, and all of the DCC friendly turnouts that I'm aware of follow a similar pattern as far as these adaptations, these changes that they've made to the design of turnouts. If you have some of these old Shinoharas, don't throw them out. All you have to do is buy some of these PC board ties, and they're readily available from companies like Clover Hill. Check your Walthers catalog, and you can purchase these, remove these metal connectors here, and replace them with this guy here. And I will put a link, as I said, to the video that I previously did on how this is done. And then you can add your jumpers as I showed you here, just like Walthers has designed these jumpers in on the backside of theirs. And that will give you a way to provide power to your closure rails and your point rails. And you can take your Dremel tool or a razor saw, whatever you want to use, and make a cut here and a cut here, drop a feeder to your frog and power it independently, and then just solder these two frog rails using metal rail joiners to the adjacent running rails, and they will be the correct polarity. Or you could do like Walthers and just install jumpers across these like I did at this point here to power those rails. So that's very easy type of conversion to do, particularly once you've done one, they just practically fall into place. So that will take care of a lot of the issues when it comes to turnouts being old and not very DCC friendly. So hopefully that is clear, and you'll be able to go ahead, make those corrections to your old Shinoharas. If you're not having problems with these, they can still be used with DCC. You just have to be very aware of the short circuit issue. Well, that's it for today's video. Hope you have a better understanding now for what I mean when I say DCC Friendly, particularly with respect to turnouts like these old Shinoharas. You know, these are very serviceable. It's very easy to modify them, and I did a previous video on how to convert these old turnouts to DCC friendly status. And I'll put a link to that video up here above me, I guess, right about here. And you can go ahead and take a look at that. So, have a great weekend, have a great week, and we'll see you here next week with another video from the DCC Guide. Bye now.